You are listening to the Ponchatoula Podcast with your host, Parker Larison. We bring you local news and community interviews from the Ponchatoula-Hammond area. Located at the crossroads of I-12 and I-55, deep in the bayous of South Louisiana. Parker is a husband, father, personal injury attorney, author, and community volunteer who is on a mission to share the unique food, culture, events, and people of Ponchatoula with the world. And here's your host, Parker Larison.
You could live anywhere in the world, so why pick Ponchatoula, Louisiana? That's the big question that we're going to address in this podcast. Ponchatoula Podcast is really a podcast. It's a show about sharing stories of the people in our area. Mostly it's going to be people from Ponchatoula, but we're also going to talk to our neighbors from Hammond and Independence and even Amite and Kentwood and all the places in between and around there. And one of the things we're going to ask each of them is, why do you live here? Why did you choose to stay in Ponchatoula if you're somebody who's been here since birth like me? Or why did you choose to move here if you're somebody who arrived later? We're going to talk about the good reasons to visit here if you just want to come in for the Strawberry Festival or some other event. And what I found is, in talking to the few people that I've interviewed so far and the many that I've talked to about this over the years, is that it's different for each person. For me, it's about the people I love, and, that starts with my family. For others, it's about the great food we eat and the fun things to do. Some people just love living on the edge of two great lakes and rivers and swamps that they can hunt and fish and ski in. Ponchatoula offers all of that and so much more. I chose our first guest, Bryan McMahon, because he really provides a perfect example of the many faces of coming to and staying in Ponchatoula. As you're going to hear, Bryan grew up on the mean streets of Detroit, just about the polar opposite of Ponchatoula, where he raised his kids. They didn't have the sense of community that we have here. They didn't have the sense of safety that we have here. They certainly didn't have the warm weather and great hunting and fishing and eating that we have here. 40 or so years ago, Bryan decided to follow his true love down here to Ponchatoula and raise a family. Along the way, there were a ton of adventures. As a publisher of the Ponchatoula Times, they broke groundbreaking stories. They did a ton to protect our community and make our community better. But Bryan did more than just write for the newspaper. He raised really smart, active, fun, well-educated children and sent them off into the world and into our community to make it a better place. He married a wonderful woman who was an educator, and she educated tons of kids here and brought cutting-edge educational theories to our area, the concept of a Montessori school being one of many. And he revitalized downtown Ponchatoula as president of the Chamber of Commerce, bringing the Ponchatoula's Antique City project to the area and much more. One of my favorite parts of his interviews was when he just talked about kind of the postcard feel of Ponchatoula. Traveling across the country from a giant city like Detroit and coming here and just seeing this picturesque little downtown. We were a smaller city then population-wise, so you can just imagine the streets. They weren't that busy. We didn't have all the traffic that we have today. And it was just a postcard of the kind of quiet, safe, wonderful community you would want to raise a family in. So that's what he did. I think that's just a great example of what we have to offer for people who live here. Ponchatoula is a neat place. If your family's been here 120 years like mine, you stay because you love it and its history, from the Ponchatoula Athletics to the Strawberry Festival and all the many great things that have happened here. But it's just as great a place to live if you just moved here last year because you got a good deal on the new DSLD subdivision up the road and you wanted your kids to be at Ponchatoula High School and you want to be playing ball out there at the park that the Dufresh has built. It's a wonderful, wonderful place. And we're going to talk about that, and we're going to tell the stories of the people that are here in this community, from folks like Bryan that have been around for a long time and fought many, many wars, to our second guest, Jonathan Rucker, who is 23 years old and about to get married and just had his first child and, just getting started. He grew up here. He played ball here. He played for the LSU Tigers, but he chose to come back to Ponchatoula when he could live anywhere in the world because it's special. And he had a special childhood here, and he wants to provide that to his son. To other people like our third guest, Mary Beth Crevetto, the principal at Ponchatoula Junior High, who grew up very nearby in Hammond and very much, a product of Hammond High. Heck, her dad was the principal there, and she went to school there and taught there, but made a conscious decision to come here with her husband, her college sweetheart, and build a family here in Ponchatoula, go to work at Ponchatoula High School, make their careers there, raise their kids there, and then stay here, even though those kids are now mostly raised and mostly married off. So this podcast is about Ponchatoula, about its people, and mostly about their stories. So I hope you enjoy that. Before we move forward, I'll tell you a little bit about our format. Each episode is going to have an interview, and that's always going to be the main focus of this podcast. I want to hear from the people in our community and just let them tell their stories. Most of my interview is going to be me getting out of the way so that they can tell you about themselves and what they've been through. But I want to offer a little more value than just that. So we're going to have a few other segments that I hope you'll like. One's called Taste of Tangi. Taste of Tangi is essentially a segment where we're going to talk to you about some good things to eat around here. Just the great food that this area has to offer. We're going to start off talking about a few restaurants, so that'll be here today. The Taste of Tangi will focus on the best Italian food you can buy in Tangipahoa Parish. Pretty bold claim, but I'm confident in my pick. And spoiler alert, it's right here in Ponchatoula, not in the much more Italian communities of Hammond, Independence, or Tickfaw. That's maybe an irony, but it's 100% true. Notice I said the best Italian food you can buy, not the best Italian food you can get, because we all know that is in some granny's house on Sunday. That's where the best red gravy lives. I know that, having married a Bruno from Independence. But when we're talking about restaurants, the best Italian restaurants right here in Ponchatoula. So Taste of Tangi is going to talk about things like that. We're going to talk to restaurateurs about their restaurants. We're going to talk about good places to eat. We may share recipes. We're going to talk to, non-professional cooks. We all know the best jambalaya in Ponchatoula was never served in any restaurant. It was cooked by Shannon Joyner. Bless his heart. We all miss Shannon. He was a dear friend and a great guy that served this community well. So we're going to reach out to people like Shannon and his friends, that just cook great stuff in their backyards and at the Strawberry Festival and other events. Another thing we're going to do is what I call Parker's Picks. And that's going to be where I share with you some great experiences that I've had with local businesses and just things that I've bought. Here's a good service, such as an auto mechanic, which will be who we'll talk about here first. Here's a great product to buy. Where can you get the best king cake? Just whatever. We're going to talk about things that I believe in. And I want you to know when we get to it, I don't get any money from any of these restaurants that we talk about in Taste of Tangi or any of the products or services that we talk about in Parker's Picks. I'm just trying to share with you places that I believe in and people that I believe in so that, when you're looking to buy something, it's a place you can trust. It's a place that's got quality. It's a place that's, maybe going to provide value and you'll get your money's worth. That's going to be the main focus of the show. We're going to try to keep our ads to a minimum so that we can focus on the content. And one, I just want to thank you for being here with me in the Ponchatoula podcast. It's going to be a lot of fun. And so with no further ado, I'll introduce our first guest to you, the publisher and founder of the Ponchatoula Times, a dear friend to the Larison family, and a total icon here in Ponchatoula, Bryan T. McMahon. Hello and welcome to the Ponchatoula podcast. I'm your host, Parker Larison. This is the first ever interview that we've done with this podcast, and I'm honored to be in the home of Bryan McMahon, the publisher of the Ponchatoula Times, and one of my lifelong heroes. I grew up a block away. I was friends with Bryan's son growing up, spent many great nights here, spending the night at the house, visiting with the family, swimming in the pool. Just wonderful family, wonderful man. And so with no further ado, Bryan, why don't you tell us a little about yourself?
Oh, but there's so much to tell. I'm a fourth-generation journalist. So we've been in this madness for a while. I guess lunacy is hard to throw off. But could be worse. It could be a sheriff or something. I grew up in Detroit. Whoa. I should say the mean streets of Detroit, because in fact, they were mean streets. And at the time, it was the murder capital of the world. And my dad was special. He just said that he didn't want us to be raised in the suburbs where he didn't think it was real. It was very real on the Lower East Side of Detroit.
Whoa. And you moved to Ponchatoula as an adult, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I was captured by my wife.
Well, remembering your wonderful wife, boy, I'd follow her anywhere in the world. If you were lucky enough to be the man to win her heart, yeah, I'd go to the swamp too. That was a good decision.
Oh, you're right. She could have said Mars, and I would have said, where do I sign up?
Well, how did the two of you meet? Tell us about that.
Went to a preparatory school with her brother, who's now Dr. Tim Frederick.
Uh-huh.
He lived for a time in Ponchatoula. And so I met her through that experience, going to school. And that's it.
And she brought you here to 7th Street in Ponchatoula to live happily there ever after. Obviously, Bryan, you're a brilliant guy. You're well educated, as you mentioned. You come from a long line of literate journalists that could do anything. You grew up in one of the big major American cities. So I guess the question is, for a guy who could live anywhere in the world and do what you do anywhere in the free world, or at least in America, you came here with your wife in Ponchatoula. Did you stay here because she wanted to, or was this something that you guys, did you ever talk about leaving? I guess I'm just looking for kind of, that was a long time ago before I was born. What kept you here?
When we first came to Ponchatoula, it was a magical place to me. Look at the people on Main Street, and I'd see Tom Sawyer with a fishing pole on his way to go try and get dinner. And Becky Thatcher skipping next to him, and Huck Finn all over the place. And they were my favorite literary characters. I'd made the mistake of bringing home a failing grade in reading.
What? How could that be?
Well, things happen. But you're right. It was the wrong thing to do with my father. He had been one of Evelyn Woods' original students, so he's accomplished at speed reading. Mm-hmm. And he was a historian, so his hobby was to speed read history books and jot off notes correcting where he found errors to the authors. So you can imagine this man, former military policeman in the Fifth Army under General Clark in World War II, getting this note from a nun saying, "Your son can't read."
Oh, my goodness.
That very day began a regimen with my father that continued for 3 or 4 years. I was allowed to stand up next to him with the family Bible open. We started on page 1, and at his insistence, I was reading aloud, which, in retrospect, now that I have my own children, I can't imagine how he had the patience to hear this second grader stumbled through words like Nebuchadnezzar. And that's how I learned to read. He corrected me when I mispronounced something. And
well, obviously it stuck because you're a brilliant writer and you can't get there without being able to read really well. So I guess you got to give him more credit than the nuns, right? That was their F too. But,
right.
but Papa McMahon delivered. That's a neat story. So you migrate from Michigan here to Ponchatoula, ironically to live across the street from another family that migrated from Michigan long ago, the Branches and Daniel's family there, with my family that had moved from Michigan in the 1890s, who were a block away. So it's kind of funny that we have all these Spartans and Wolverines living among the Tigers down here. We mentioned your wonderful wife, and Being such a giant fan of hers, I would feel remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about the great things she did in Ponchatoula. She was a renowned educator, a patron of the arts, one of the best mothers I've ever seen in my life, a wonderful wife to you. So, if you would, and if you're comfortable sharing, could you just tell us a little bit about Miss Terry Ann and the great things she did here in Ponchatoula or anywhere else?
I could go on for hours.
I'd love to hear it.
No, she was truly a great person. Before we got married, she had done things like bring medicine to the poor in rural Mexico, riding donkeys to make the deliveries, and up and down mountains. And so she was very dedicated to education.
Yeah.
She happened into Montessori education, and that really excited her. And she mastered that, got her certification as a Montessori teacher internationally. And along the way, she became an expert at learning disabilities. So we had a little bit of that in our family. So the combination resulted in a woman that started in Ponchatoula a Montessori school, which of course was unheard of at the time.
Right.
And was able to help out the kids that were struggling. She used to love to wait until the announcement was made as to who was the salutatorians and who was the valedictorian at Ponchatoula High School, because invariably they were her ex-students.
I remember well all of her students going on to do well in my age range. It reminds me of a funny story about two guys that are longtime friends of yours. My dad, Ed Larison, and his best friend, the late Carl Cleveland. Papa may get mad at me for telling this story on him, but I think you'll appreciate it. He and his buddies had all skipped school their senior year for senior skip day. Mr. Butler, who was the principal at the time, calls them in there, and, there's a line of students out his door, each kid getting in trouble one after another. And they call Dad in there, and Dad just spills the beans on him and Carl. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Butler, we did this, we did that. I'll never do it again. Just really rolled over. He did not assert his Fifth Amendment right to keep silent. And Mr. Butler just started laughing. And he was known to be a stern disciplinarian. And he said, well, Larison, I called Jen here to tell you you're the class salutatorian, but now I'm not sure you're going to graduate. So anytime I hear the word salutatorian, that brings that story to mind. So you're mentioning her kids went on to great success. They did wonderful things. I didn't mean to cut you off, but please continue.
Well, that's a good diversion, talking about Will Ed Butler, because he took a shine to my family, and he would show up with his car and say, come on, we have an adventure. And so the kids would pile into the car, and he'd take us down to a sugar plantation.
Oh, wow.
Which he knew the owners of these plantations because of one of his books chronicled everything they did. So he introduced us to that whole aspect of Louisiana. It was kind of nice. Will Ed was a fantastic man.
Yeah, great man, great family. His son, Mr. King's a wonderful guy. He was at the high school when I was there. I'll be right back with the rest of our interview in just a moment. You know how car crash victims struggle to pay for the medical care they need? Well, at the Parker Larison Law Firm, we help busy families recover after car accidents so that they can rest easy, pay their medical expenses without worry, and move forward with their lives. We do this by sharing our free accident handbook, battling Goliath insurance companies, and treating our clients like family. Our clients say we help them save time and recover the money they deserve so that they can focus on getting well and living normal lives again. If you were injured in a car, truck, or motorcycle accident, give us a call now, 985-467-9525. My window into your family was through your children. You know, you obviously have a ton of brilliant daughters and a brilliant son, Brendan, who happened to be my buddy. And that's how I would come to spend the night over here and have fun. And he was a year behind me in school, a year ahead of Bree. So kind of right there, but as the 7th Street gang. One thing I noticed early on, because I always aspired to get a good education, it was always a value in our house that was really important. But I noticed that your kids really set the trend here in Ponchatoula for going all over the country and eventually the world, just getting world-class educations at great universities, you know. I guess I'm building up to here. Tell us about your kids. That's kind of part one. And part two, I've always been curious. How'd you pull that off, man? You must have had the highest tuition bill in the history of Tangipahoa Parish. Kudos on that.
Yeah, well, what else are you going to spend the money on?
Right.
I mean, there's nothing more important.
Yeah, you're right. Now, I noticed that you still have many of your children in the masthead of the newspaper. You know, they're kind of your worldwide correspondents. And I'm always tickled to see something come in from, you know, Deidre across the Western Hemisphere and, you know, folks everywhere. You know, it's got to be really rewarding for you to see them go off and do so well in so many different parts of the world.
Oh, it is, sure. Yes.
The other thing about you that I remember well from growing up down the street is that you had such a cast of characters as friends. You know, if you'd care to, I'd love for you to share just anything about your friend. I mean, you had guys here that, to me, they were just like 10 feet tall and bulletproof, but they came from all walks of life. You know, some may be smart and educated like you. Others were just the most interesting roughnecks you ever meet in your life, and it's just great folks. I mean, what brought this band of brothers together? And, you know, just tell us a little bit about that, the folks that passed through, you know, your home over the years.
Beer, mostly.
That's a candid Irish answer there, right?
Yeah, well, I was good friends with Dr. Jim Patton, who is the founder of Abita Beer.
Oh, wow.
Once a week, on the day the paper came out, an Abita truck would roll by and a keg would magically roll off of it. And that was an occasion for a weekly party celebrating the newest edition coming out. So,
yeah, that'll explain some popularity right there. Okay, mystery solved.
Yes, I'm a very popular fellow. Yeah.
It wouldn't take Bob Woodward to get to the bottom of that mystery. Well, tell us, speaking of Mr. Woodward, obviously we are at a pivot in history, as I believe he's recently called it, especially with regards to your career, journalism. Eventually, I'd love to get to your thoughts on where journalism is today and where that differs from when you started. But tell us about the start of that career. You're 4th-generation journalist. Did you always know you wanted to follow in your father's footsteps like my brother Bree did in his? Or were you more like me and didn't know what you wanted to do and ended up there anyway? How'd that come about?
I'd say I'm more like you, but you do what you're best at, you know. Mm-hmm. By the time my father put me through the rigors of reading the entire Bible, and then as a treat, when I finished that, he let me read Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn.
Your favorite book? Okay.
Standing up next to him. So, yeah, I enjoyed all that.
Okay. What was your first job in journalism?
Unless you consider the school newspapers and whatnot, but that's some of the first stuff I did. I went to a school that was taught by the Augustinian friars, who, if you ever saw one, you'd probably liken them to Darth Vader. They wore these black cassocks that went all the way to the floor. And there was no rosary beads cinching the waist. No, there was a leather belt. And it hooked around and went down to the ankles. And the Augustinians are the oldest teaching order in the world. And they knew how to use the leather belt. So, not that the very Reverend Father Leo Burke, the disciplinarian, needed one. He had a bullwhip.
Oh, whoa!
And he didn't, of course, never laid the lash on a child. But you didn't know that. And he was so adept at it that he could make it crack right next to your ear. So at this all-boys school, that was a handy talent to have.
Wow. This really belongs in a movie. It's trending toward horror movie right now, if you ask me. Thank goodness it ended well. So did you work, after school, did you work in the newspapers in Detroit before you moved here?
I started as a paper boy.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, throwing out a route, and that's how I made my money.
So when you became a publisher, you would understand the business side of a newspaper much better than your average reporter, probably, having started on that end of things.
That's a slow lot. Yeah, I did the regular high school journalism deal, and that carried on through college. And along the way, I published a couple books, poetry books that won a few speaking awards.
Oh, wow.
This is all going back to my father's instruction of me. It all paid off.
Was your father able to see you reach those heights, or did he pass before that time?
No, all I could do is shake his head, because they made you the poet of the state, and they're paying you $500 a week to go around and read your poems. He said, "Hi, what are you doing? Claude, you're a scam artist."
What? You gotta be kidding me. That must have been so tough.
Oh, no. That was his way of expressing admiration.
Yeah, well, that must really mean a lot to you to come from such a tough, beginning with the written, word to reach those heights. Well, when you moved to Louisiana, your first job in journalism was not the Ponchatoula Times, right? You didn't come here and immediately open your paper, or did you?
No, I went to. I just finished organizing a union at the largest evening newspaper in the world, the Detroit News.
Oh, wow.
And
well, let's not skip that story. Can we back up a little bit? Can you tell me about that? Because that's too good to miss.
Well, that involved getting locked out at the end of it. And at that point, it was a good idea to go to another state.
Preferably one very far away, right?
Yeah. I like the union movement. I had a chance to grow up a little bit with Lisa Reuther, the daughter of Walter Reuther and the niece of Victor Reuther, who together founded the United Auto Workers.
So you had a real bird's eye view into the biggest, and best there were, huh?
Oh, yeah.
That's neat.
Yeah, I came to really love unionism.
Well, that's a rare voice here in Louisiana. So I've always had a soft spot for unions. Mr. Vic Busey helped me get through school and helped me with some scholarships, and he was important to that movement here in the state.
Well, we wouldn't buy a car without having a contract. We wouldn't buy a house without having a contract, certainly. Why would we trade all of our labors in life without a contract?
It's a good point. That's right. Getting back to your career in journalism, you moved from Detroit here after, that movement, the union movement at such a large newspaper. What's the first job you get when you get to Ponchatoula?
I was under a pseudonym, a nom de plume. Some called it a nom de guerre. I wrote for the Slidell Daily Times under the name of Bryan, Ireland. So
that would be too on the nose these days. You couldn't get away with that in 2018. All right, so you were telling us about Bryan, Ireland, your pseudonym and the Slidell newspaper.
I won some awards under that name. Yeah, that was fun. And to this day, the people in St. Tammany Parish that knew me then still think my name's Bryan, Ireland.
Well, what were you writing about? What were the awards for?
Government corruption, things like that, hard-hitting stuff. Yes.
Now, eventually, and I know this is getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but you would come to win the highest awards that Louisiana journalists have to offer. Is that right, for newspapers?
Yes.
I mean, you did really well.
Yes, Louisiana Press Association was generous in its praise.
You're being too modest. We'll get to that, but you're definitely being too modest. So you're writing as Bryan, Ireland for the Slidell newspaper. What's the next move after that?
After that, I really had the bug by then. I knew that's what I wanted to do, and I realized I wanted to have my own newspaper. I didn't want to. This whole idea of reporting to bosses and whatnot wasn't everything it could be, and so.
I can relate to that. That's why I'm in your living room wearing sandals, right now instead of wearing a suit on Poydras Street. So that's something I can relate to. So you got the bug, and now was it Ponchatoula Times, or did you have a different name for the paper then?
Well, at the time, I'd with a couple partners had bought the old paper in Hammond, the Hammond Vindicator.
Oh, okay.
I loved the motto of the thing. It was "Let the fur fly." And George Campbell was a great old guy that I never had a chance to meet in life. Hope to see him in the great beyond one day. But he had a column called "The Stroller," which was just perfect. He'd use that to put everybody's name in the paper. Yeah.
Was that an inspiration for what would later become Hardhide's column?
Oh, well, yeah, it really was.
I can't wait till you tell us more about Hardhide in a bit. So the Vindicator is a Hammond paper. Did it cover Ponchatoula, or was it, greater
It did
Hammond?
once I got my hands on it. Oh, yeah.
What was the style of that paper? What kind of stuff did you write about? Was it similar to your current paper?
Let the fur fly. No, it was never a dull moment, that's for sure. Like the time they were thought it was a brilliant idea to move huge quantities of styrene monomer, which has a flash point somewhere in the 90-degree area, through Tangipahoa Parish in a huge train car.
Talk about bad ideas.
Yeah. Yes. And
So you exposed that and helped stop it.
it nearly did me in. I mean, I was standing next to this train like an idiot, taking photos of this thing. This is the one that's going to blow up and take off half the city with it? Oh, okay.
You were like those reporters that are standing on the beach right now in the hurricane.
Yeah. Oh, no. Those people.
Maybe a little too good at your job for...
Yeah. Those sopping wet fools.
Well, speaking of that kind of courage, I mean, I've always admired your courage as a journalist ever since I was a kid. It seems to really come from a deep place. Can you tell us about that? Is that something that's hereditary as a fourth-generation journalist? Is it personal to you? Is it acquired? Is it innate? What gives you the courage? Because you've always taken on injustice wherever you've seen it, whether it was in government at City Hall in Ponchatoula or the railroad or the union, wherever. What is it in you, and where does it come from that gives you the courage to do that?
I grew up in a really rough neighborhood.
The main streets of Detroit. That's a great answer.
Yeah, I mean, I had to fight my way to school and fight my way home every day. You develop certain notions of fairness and empowering those weaker than you, and journalism was a wonderful way to express all of that.
Yeah.
And I came from a family like that. My great uncle was the mayor of Detroit. Another great uncle was the highest ranking Catholic clergyman in the city, and they were half a family that split early on. Half of them stayed in the Mobile, Alabama area. And the last building you'll pass before you go under Mobile Bay, if you look off to the left, it says Van Antwerp down the side of it.
Okay. How'd they end up in Mobile? What brought them there?
Well, like I said, the family kind of split. Some of them.
But there was no pretty girl like Miss Terry Ann drawing them down that far south, or was there?
There's no pretty girl anything like her anyway.
That part, that's true, man. Poorly worded question. So was it a business opportunity? Was it a...
Well, this goes way back. I mean, decades and decades. One of our family members was the one-legged mayor of New Amsterdam, who's Peter Stuyvesant. That was an ancient relative of mine.
Oh, wow.
I mean, they've been here for forever.
So is that Danny's family? Is Danny your cousin? Is that how that all fits in?
Yeah, Judge Danny.
Yeah, okay. Been reading about him my whole life in Hardhide's column. That's good to put those pieces together.
Oh, yeah.
Well, getting back to the Ponchatoula Times, or at this point we were talking about the Vindicator. How long, or when did you move on from the Hammond Vindicator and do the Ponchatoula Times? Did that paper become the Ponchatoula Times? Did you start a separate paper? What was that transition?
I started a separate paper.
Okay.
But it did spin off from the Vindicator.
And when was that?
1970s.
Okay.
In there somewhere.
So the paper's about 40 years old, roughly, or a little over that, maybe?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, amazing. So 40 years, it wasn't the first newspaper in Ponchatoula, but it's the last. You outlasted all the competition. You've seen other papers come and go. Tell me about 40 years in Ponchatoula. Start with anything, whatever's on your mind. The best characters you've covered, from the, Dave Berwicks of the world to the best stories you had, the biggest, scandals, challenges. Just what comes to mind first when you look back at 40 plus years of covering this little town?
What I like most about Ponchatoula is that nobody was going to serve it all up for you. Nobody was going to do anything for you necessarily. But on the other hand, you could do anything that sprang to mind, and nobody would stop you. So when I decided to start a newspaper, it was fairly easy going, But having a newspaper and not using it for anything it'd be like having a Ferrari and leaving it in park.
Right.
So I shot off my mouth once too often and got elected president of the Chamber of Commerce. And that was exciting because I used the same skills I used in union organizing, but I was able to organize a Chamber of Commerce. And that went well.
Well, I know you know, in terms of community involvement, you were a big mover in things like America's Antique City and revitalizing our downtown, which had this beautiful Huck Finn, Tom Sawyer look that you mentioned earlier, but it was also a ghost town at one point until you guys got your hands on it. Was that through the Chamber of Commerce, or did you use a different vehicle?
I used the Chamber of Commerce as the vehicle.
Okay.
At the time, you could lie down in the middle of Pine Street and have an undisturbed nap.
Really?
Yeah, there was no traffic. There was no. It was just, to me, it was an incredible waste, because I looked at it and I said, "This is the finest little town in the world."
So you're mentioning to me that you had this beautiful little town. It was just the best in the world, but it was just dead. Tell us about, what that.
It was dead. They had, and everything seemed to be conspiring against it. The state tore up Main Street and left it torn up for 3 years.
Whoa.
I was just flabbergasted.
No wonder no business could survive on Main Street.
No. So started America's Antique City because my good friend Stanley Cowan had proved that antiques would be a good thing for Ponchatoula. He had the auction in town and brought in a huge crowd every Saturday for his auction. And I was doing his printing for him, including a newsletter that he put out to his clients. And all these people owned antique stores all over the South. And they came to Ponchatoula to bid on and buy their antiques to sell. So you mentioned Will Ed Butler a while back. When we finally opened up America's Antique City, which was something of a joke because there were no antique stores there. It was in my mind.
Yeah.
But Will Ed played along. He brought his cannon. And we fired it off, and we officially opened it up. We had the helicopters come in with the governor, and if there wasn't a thriving community at that moment, it was hard to imagine there wouldn't be.
So you had the "if you build it, they will come" vision for this thing, which absolutely worked. And I saw it through the lens of my mom. She would eventually open up her little antique store with her dear friend Nietzsche Walker, Larison Walker Limited, downstairs of what would one day become my law office. And I mean, they just came everywhere. You know, my uncle C.J. Scanduro came to town with now he's got an emporium there, and there were countless antique stores. That's really amazing. So you and Mr. Cowan had the vision. And who else did you enlist to help with that? I mean,
the list was long. Tommy Waterman, Doug Johnson,
great man.
Charlene Daniels.
Oh yeah,
God, she was right at the heart of it.
Sure.
And it was the logical thing for Ponchatoula to do. We had the huge antique auction, which was the anchor industry, if you will, and we just needed to weave around it.
Well, it really did. It saved the town, and you'd see these beautiful old, but in some cases dilapidated buildings being remodeled, refurbished. You know, just a lot of polished gems came of that effort. So, as a Ponchatoula boy, let me say thank you. Especially consider that helped pay for my college. You know, so that was a great idea. What other type of community initiatives did y'all? Can we talk about the Crew of Aaron? The Crew of Aaron is something that I've had more fun being part of that over the years. It's just such a fun time.
Oh, that comes naturally being Irish.
Yeah. Tell us about your Irish heritage and how you express that through the Crew of Aaron. And really, I would love to get to all the good y'all do with these princesses and queens. And I mean, y'all have really empowered young women to really do some great things through that.
Well, when Terry Ann and I came to Ponchatoula, there was absolutely nothing for a young girl to do that would require putting on a dress. And I had 3 daughters at the time.
Right.
And one gangly son. And that just, we couldn't let that stand. So we made it all up out of whole cloth. I mean, I didn't want to have a kind of beauty pageant like some do.
Right.
Where girls put on their mommy's makeup and tarred up for this contest, you know. I said, no, we can do better than that. Let's do it in the true Celtic fashion, and let's have it be a contest of artistry and wit. So let the girls compete with essay contest, art contest, 1 year of music contest. And the girls flocked to it, and they shone. It was the right thing to do.
And eventually it paid off in helping you find a beautiful daughter-in-law that's produced some great grandkids that we were talking about before we came on air. Am I right? Am I remembering that right? Your son Brendan's beautiful wife was, in fact, a Crew of Aaron, a queen or princess. And is that how they met? What's the story there?
Yes, that's how they met.
One of my favorite weddings ever. They had a beautiful wedding in New Orleans, big giant cathedral. Yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah, she was Landis Nierenberger from the west side of town here. And it was homeschooled. So it was like an ancient Irish story of Deirdre of the Sorrows, this red-haired beauty living out in the country. And she got involved, and that year we had a poetry competition. And we have several members of the SLU faculty were in the crew and involved in judging. And they said, she couldn't possibly have written this. So they put their fact checkers on it, and they have computer systems at the university where they can catch plagiarists and look the whole world over to see who really wrote that poem.
Oh, wow.
Well, at the end of the search, it came back to Landis. So eventually I said, Brendan, why don't you ask that girl out? Oh, She'd never do that. She'd not go out with me. I said, you fool. Ask her out. Take your chance. And so he actually did what his dad suggested. The girl said yes. I now got 3 lovely grandchildren as a result from him alone. Yeah, it was great. And it's a great poem.
Well, I'm so glad you came up with that good idea because they've got a beautiful family. He's been a dear friend to me my whole life, and nobody deserves a beautiful wife and beautiful children more than your son. Brendan's a great guy.
Equal to yourself, of course.
He's just tremendous.
You have a lovely wife.
Well, thank you. No, there's a football term for what Brendan and I have done. It's called we outkicked our coverage. And mine is not Crew of Aaron related, but it's close to home. I'm a Strawberry Festival love story. I met Brandy at the Strawberry Festival, and she was a strawberry queen, which is a stone's throw away from the Crew of Aaron. So that is one thing we share is beautiful wives that have brought us great children, and we're thankful for that. Tell me about the Ponchatoula Times' impact on social or political change, because where I'm coming from with this question is I can think here, in recent years, I am certain that some of your brave coverage that just got to the truth of matters has helped this town be a better place. For example, covering the brown water scandal, we're not there yet, the water's not clear yet, but I'm convinced that none of the progress that we've made would have happened without the Ponchatoula Times. The Walmart story. Right now, my friend Brad Poche and his wife Catherine are building their dream home, and it's going to be beautiful because the Ponchatoula Times covered Walmart, exposed some bad planning the city that had, and kind of forced change and forced a new plan that would allow Walmart to exist and support our community without ruining the neighborhood next door. Tell us about that.
Oh, well, there was a few tweaks we put into things when we got rolling. First thing that bothered me the most wasn't Walmart. That later bothered me, but earlier than that, one of the absolute horror stories was the fact that we had this pristine parish with this lovely river running through it, and it was polluted.
Yeah.
Polluted. I couldn't believe it. So I started Citizens for a Clean, Tangible Whole, which was determined to clean it up. And we attracted some volunteers to that cause. Ben Taylor comes to mind, Dwight Williams, and several more. Several more.
Well, yeah, it was a lot because I remember in my youth seeing CFACT bumper stickers everywhere. I mean, you spawned an army of environmentalists to get that river clean.
I set up the organizational meet at the home of Pat and Ned Richardson.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And so we had the river running past the picture window there. And it was great inspiration for cleaning up the river. Mm-hmm. So we plotted, schemed, and eventually attracted a bunch of volunteers to the cause. And they had signs, filthy signs up and down the river saying, "Don't swim, polluted, stay away." I've got one of them as a cargo guard in the bottom of the trunk of my car. Because when they finally had to admit that we cleaned up the river, they had to say, yes, you can take the signs down.
Oh, that must have been such a proud day. Such a beautiful river, for tubing, swimming, canoeing, fishing, whatever you want to do. It's great. And, of course, there are a ton of camps at the mouth of that river. So those guys were getting all that pollution and the kids that swam there. That's a great example of the major type of change you made in this town. What else are you most proud of that you changed over the years?
Well, let's see, you got the Antique City, I think we touched on the major things.
Yeah, and it's been big issues like that, but I also think probably you've kept a lot of things from becoming problems because people knew you were there as a watchdog, and because Hardhide was there to write this column that could let people know in a more informal way. Can you tell us about Old Hardhide and Pinch Penny. And folks, I'm talking about this brilliant column that you'll find in every edition of the Ponchatoula Times. There's a mystique behind it. It's written by our town alligator, Old Hardhide. How'd you develop that relationship with that reptile?
I was fascinated by the gator. You have to understand, I'm from Michigan.
Right.
They don't have alligators in Michigan.
You mean you don't have an alligator on Main Street in a cage like we do?
No.
Oh, wow.
And so I thought, matter of fact, I was writing about alligator hunting, and my father picked up the phone one day. He says, "Will you stop putting those lies in the paper?"
Really?
And I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, about the hunting alligators and stuff. I said, "They do that here." Believe it, it's true. He goes, "No, really?" I go, "Yeah." So it was just that sort of thing that the rest of the world needed to know how unique we truly are.
Right. Well, here, less than a block away, what is that, a half a block away from your home where we're sitting, is Regions Bank on Main Street. They literally had an alligator in the yard or in the drive-through line of that just a few weeks ago. The picture was all over social media. So, you shared that with the world. That's been neat. Well, I've always enjoyed Old Hardhide. He's funny and searing at times, and I know that he's helped keep the train on its tracks, so to speak, here in Ponchatoula.
Yeah, sometimes you can affect more change with humor than you can with bitterness.
Yeah, I think you're right for sure. Well, tell me about you have been, Bryan, the voice of Ponchatoula through good times and bad for 40 plus years. What do you think of Ponchatoula today? How do you see our trajectory? How's the city? What's the state of the city today in 2018?
I think the city's in great shape. Luckily, we didn't go overboard in the direction of Walmart. Mm-hmm. Luckily, we didn't abandon perfectly viable tourist attraction downtown in the antique city.
Right.
Although there were efforts to do that. Mm-hmm. I like the combination. I like the mix.
Yeah.
Where you got antique stores and you've got music scene going. You got poetry scene quietly going in the background. And it's just a nice mix to not be dominated by a Walmart.
Right. You can get the best of both worlds. You can have the convenience and affordability of this giant store, but you didn't have to come and ruin downtown to do it.
Right, exactly. And it's worked out well, and I think going on those two tracks is going to bode well for Ponchatoula in the future.
Well, it seems to me like you have a sense of optimism in your point of view on Ponchatoula's, future and outlook. Is that fair?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Once I moved my family here, and I had these little kids and had to raise them. And then there's this wild gang on North 7th Street with you and your brothers. And,
you're right about that. There were some streetlights that needed replacing back in the day, if I recall. We weren't well behaved all the time, for sure.
It was a fun place to raise children and a fun place to be raised if you were a child.
You're right about that. Well, as we come to a conclusion here, is there anything else you'd like to add? What have I missed here? What would you like to share with our listeners about yourself, about your paper, about the city, anything on your mind?
I just always loved Eddie Larison. I think that he marked a change politically in this area, certainly. Introduced a bunch of people that the Morrisons and all his friends that were a cut above and helped form today's Ponchatoula, as have you, as have your classmates. And we got to keep moving forward. We can't move backward, and we can't let them push us backward or hold us back.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. It's mutual. My whole family just loves you and yours, and my dad is really appreciative of the friendship and loyalty you've shown him over the years. And I know we all are. So thank you.
I was the first one to endorse him.
Back then, it was a very short list. And he just never fails to realize how brave a decision that was in 1979.
Brave's a good word.
No, it really, yeah. If there's no better one I can come up with.
Stupid.
You said it, not me. Thank God it all worked out. And the last thing I want to ask you, as someone who is not native to Ponchatoula, but has been here forever and been an indelible part of it, what advice would you give to somebody who's either thinking of moving here or just did move here or is visiting here? I mean, just a beginner's guide to Ponchatoula as a parting shot. What would you say to someone about Ponchatoula?
If you're coming here, come here prepared to be involved. Mm-hmm. You know, again, one of the joys of Ponchatoula is you can do anything that comes into your foolish head, you know, and they'll let you get away with it. You can start an antique city. You can start a Citizens for a Clean, Tangible Whole. Anything you want to do, you can do. Please do it.
Well, you've proven that, and we're so grateful that you did. And thank you for that advice, and especially thank you for your actions in doing exactly what you recommend to our listeners. We are living in a wonderful town, and it's a much better place because you've been here for 40 years, and I'm so grateful that you're still doing that good work. So thank you, Bryan McMahon. We're very grateful.
Thank you, Parker.
We call this part of the podcast Taste of Tangi. This is where we explore the delicious food that the Tangipahoa Parish area has to offer, from Ponchatoula strawberries to seafood gumbo and Hammond to the delicious red gravy and Italian food of Independence. We're going to talk about what our area has to offer. Sometimes we'll be talking about restaurants. Sometimes we'll be talking about non-professional chefs. Sometimes we'll be talking about places to get food, produce, you name it. But today, for our first taste of Tangi, I want to talk about the best Italian food in Tangipahoa Parish. Now, if you know the greater Hammond area or Tangipahoa Parish, then you know that we have a ton of hardworking Italian families here. There is a rich history of Italians here in this area going back for a really long time. It's one of the larger concentrations of Italian immigrants here in America, especially in rural America. So there is a hot debate over who's got the best red gravy in Tangipahoa Parish. And of course, that's got to be some, lifelong family recipe at some grandma's house, probably in Independence. So that's a debate I won't get into today. But what I can tell you emphatically is that the best Italian food that you can buy in Tangipahoa Parish, ironically, is right here in Ponchatoula, the least Italian city in the parish. But we have a great restaurant I want to tell you about. It's called Ristorante Foodies. It is owned by its chef, Paolo Ceni, who you may know and remember from his father's wonderful restaurant, Piero's, that was located first here in Ponchatoula and then for many years in Kenner. Paolo was the chef there, and he has brought those delicious recipes back home to Ponchatoula, where he and his wonderful wife, Emily, are raising a ton of adorable kids here in Ponchatoula. And they have just got the best food you can buy. My favorite would probably have to be the gnocchi. It's just incredible. It's got such a great sauce, wonderful steaks and meats of all sorts. My wife, Brandy, loves their crab cakes. I know for at least the first 2 anniversaries we had, she would always beg me to go out to dinner. At that time, it would be down at Piero's in Kenner. So we'd get out of town, go down there to get Chef Paolo's house-made pasta, specifically his blue crab ravioli. We were so just overjoyed when he came here back home to Ponchatoula, just a few blocks away from our home. So now we have a much shorter drive to get that delicious food, and we can get it more often. But you're going to find wonderful food. Now, full disclosure, this is not Sicilian. This is a family from northern Italy. So it's a different type of Italian food than you may be accustomed to if you grew up eating a lot of the red sauces of our region. But I can promise you that you're going to love it. It's wonderful. So for the first taste of Tangi, we are happy to endorse Ristorante Foodies right here in Ponchatoula on Pine Street, next door to the Collinswood Museum, across the street from Paul's Cafe. And I can just tell you, you're going to love it. This is a destination restaurant. You should go there for a special event like a date or an anniversary or a big business deal. Now, that doesn't mean it's priced, super high. It's reasonably priced, but it is nice. This is the place to go when you want to have a nice glass of wine, delicious gourmet food, and you have the time to sit around and enjoy your company and enjoy that kind of meal. So once again, Ristorante Foodies is our first selection for Taste of Tangi. This section of the podcast is called Parker's Picks. And this is where I attempt to share with you some of the best consumer experiences that I've had. For example, in today's day and age, with places like Amazon.com and all the various shopping outlets that are available to us, you literally have hundreds, if not thousands, of choices for the things that you buy, or the services that you get. And sometimes it's a bit difficult to tell who is trustworthy, who brings high quality, who has a good bargain, that's worth the price they charge. And rather than trust just anonymous reviews online or self-serving statements by the people that are trying to sell you stuff, I thought it may be helpful, at least here on a local level, for me to share with you places and products that I've had really good experiences with. So I'm going to lead off this week with our first Parker's Pick with a mechanic shop located here in Ponchatoula that I have used many times. I've used it myself for my cars. I've used it for my wife's cars. I have recommended it to others. My whole family uses this place. My dad has used it from everything from his brand new F-150 pickup truck to his old 1940s World War II Willis Jeep. And the mechanic who owns the place he's, for lack of a better term, he's just a great man. He's very good at what he does. He has mastered his trade as a mechanic, but he's also a good person that you can trust. Just a great guy. And so with no further ado, the name of this place is called Graves Automotive, and it's owned by my dear friend Marshall Graves. Now, Marshall is from the Graves family here in Ponchatoula that has been around forever. If you know a Graves, then you probably have seen them driving a bus around here somewhere, because they have a fleet of Tangipahoa Whole Parish School System bus drivers. Both Marshall, his parents, his aunts, uncles, many relatives, cousins, they drive buses. And of course, they do other things. His father is one of the most prominent ministers here in the Ponchatoula community. He's just a great man in his own right. I've known Marshall's wife, Amy, my entire life since we were young children. She's wonderful. They are raising 3 incredible kids, one of which is now a young man is playing basketball at LSU. The 2 younger children are equally incredible. And so this is not just a great mechanic that's going to do a phenomenal job on your car, although he is that 100%. He's also a guy you can trust. If he tells you it's going to be done by next Wednesday, you can expect it to be done by next Wednesday. If he tells you it's going to cost $200, you can expect it's going to cost $200. He's just a really honorable guy. He's been there for me when I've had a jam. He'll come out, test drive your car if you need that, to listen to something that's knocking or whatever. Graves Automotive, Ponchatoula, it gets my highest recommendation, not just as a business that's going to treat you right, but as a business that's locally owned by people that are doing great things in our community. I don't have enough time in this podcast to talk about all the great things Marshall Graves does as a volunteer, as a mentor to young men and women, as a minister himself. He's followed his father's footsteps into the ministry, and as a father who's just raising great kids that are doing great things here in Ponchatoula. This is the kind of man you want to do business with. So check out Graves Automotive right here in Ponchatoula. Because this show is new, any and all support is greatly appreciated. If you haven't already done so, number 1, subscribe at the Apple Podcasts app or iTunes or Stitcher or Android, wherever you listen to podcasts. Number 2, and this is important, write a 5-star rating and review the podcast. Number 3, and this is the biggest, most important thing you could do, share it with your friends. We've got a Facebook page under the name, The Ponchatoula Podcast. Check it out, like it, share it. You're going to see information about who we're interviewing, what's coming up. If you really want to get local news about Ponchatoula, Hammond, if you want to hear about local people here in Tangipahoa Parish, please support our podcast. We will be happy to share that information, but we need your help to make this thing a success. So thank you so much. I'm very excited to get going. I've lived here my whole life. I love this area, the people that live here, the things to do here, the food we cook here, etc. I could go on, but we'll do that later in subsequent episodes. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it, and I can't wait to share the Ponchatoula podcast with you.